Okay, well, we talked about boots recently because we talked about cowboys and heritage of what is a cowboy. And if you looked at the definition, Proto-Indo-Europeans had a wheel and a cart and a wagon pulled by horses, and they went west. They even had boots on. But this is a little different. This is also of a little bit older in age somewhat than people will give credit for somebody having footwear, if you will. For this is one of the world's oldest shoes. 5,500 years old, made out of leather, and it was found in an Armenian cave up in the highlands to where it's pretty dry and crisp and was allowed things like that to happen or something to be preserved. There's an oddity and a Sherlock Holmes thing that goes along with this too, to where there's only one shoe found. And so people speculate on that. It's shoved full of grass to keep its shape. And one would think, well, in a shoe like this, if they got it wet and took it off, they would probably do something like this and then dry it out to try to have it retain its shape. But I've often thought, whenever looking at this, that a couple of things about it. It's stitched in the back and in the front, so it was made like a book that's open to the size of the foot and then cut around it. It's doubled up around the rim, around where your ankle would go. But it's stitched up in the front and the heel area, but stitch up in the front only about half, 2/3 of the way. And a lot of us take our shoe about like that and slip it on and then stitch up the rest of the way. But he would have been using a different stitch. Apparently the string no longer goes on with the same one, or it decayed and came off, so he could have used an extra piece of it. But I've often thought what this was he made a shoe and then took it off and stuffed it with this. Now, after you do that and it's done the tanning and let it drying, somebody said, well, what you'd do is then you'd put it back on your foot and you would get it wet. Then you would let it dry on your foot, walk around with it and crap, and that would make it form to your foot real well. Then after that point, you would pull it back out and still stuff it like this, like you used to put shoe trees in old shoes, if you know. We don't do this type of thing anymore, but you've seen shoe trees for old granddad shoes and his leather shoes and things like that. And it kept the toes and everything formed right, and the shoes formed right over time so they didn't collapse. And this is that same concept, but 5,500 years ago. It's pretty neat, especially thinking about how it's only half stitched up. You know, they've already got that idea going on and stuff to it too. This is nothing like a boot, but it wouldn't take anything but the top part of it to be made on up further to protect your shin and so on, and this could be made into some type of boot. And we say this is the earliest one that we can find is a total shoe, but there has been a lot of leather remnants found on bones leading way back into the last ice age, where there's remnants somewhat near their feet. And so that could have been the decayed parts of stuff, and there has been people that speculated and say, oh, maybe they took a piece of hide and wrapped it around their foot, and took a little piece of twine and wrapped around it like you have a burlap bag around your foot or some crap like that, instead of even giving a possibility of shoe, because, well, they have to give them nothing if they don't have any proof of it. Well, here's proof of a shoe. Has a little elf point on the end of it somewhat due to the way it's made. But it dates back to this date, and it's found in this Armenian cave in like 1992. I think they found it in there, and it says that it measures 24.5 centimeters long, which is actually European size 37. I don't know what that goes with in America somewhat. I wear a 9.5 wide, got to get a 10 or above if it's not a wide shoe. These look like they're wide too, by the way. But it also says 7/6, so is that a 7 and 6 shoe? And it goes to 10 centimeters wide and was made from a single piece of leather worn in shape to the wearer's right foot. It was stuffed with loose, unfastened grass, which is used to maintain the shoe and prepare it for storage. So it was stored up there somewhat, and people would think, well, why? Well, it's up in these Alterian caves, so it's like a little hill spot. And again, this is before Stonehenge or the pyramids or anything. This is the way it looked when they first found it coming out of the dirt, and people think, what the hell does that look like? Well, it was found with a stash of grain too. Oats, wheat, and barley, and apricots. So one would say, well, he was making extra shoes and probably still had shoes. This is just my summation. And making up extra shoes, perhaps his left shoe had gone bad, and here he is making the one that replaces it, or the right, so on. But he had the stash and stuff, so whenever he left, he had every intention of probably coming back, but he never made it back. Now you could think of, well, this must have been from some type of animal or something along that line. Here you can see it's better that it stitches up to a certain point and stops. Well, almost looks like there's a knot made right there. But maybe he ran out and into an animal, things went bad, because if things didn't go any way other than decent or good, he would have gone back and gotten his stuff and gotten his other shoe. And if his hunt was successful, or the animal that attacked him, or however that went his way, he'd perhaps be making a new pair of shoes out of something else. Next thing you know, he'd have a pair of lion hide shoes going around, or alligator shoes, and so on. But sadly, we don't know what happened to him. Did he run into some people? Being a loner somewhat. Was he even a loner at this point? Was this a stash of a group of people and something radical happened? One can only, get Sherlock Holmes and try to come up with ideas on how this might have happened and what may have come out of it. But a lot of people say this must have been the Kurgan people and their burials, and we talked about this in the Kurgan mounds, which if you look at it, looks like a mound city in up the Mississippi, or places in America too, ironically. But these people would have had this type of mounds that they build and they buried things into. And you think about Catalhoyuk and, well, Göbekli Tepe, and it was all buried in a mound and stuff, and these heritage of these people that came in through this time. And they say, well, this must have been of the very first Proto-Indo-Europeans. Of course, they wouldn't have looked like this in their farming. Well, they quite a bit, I guess, except for they would have had blonde and red hair somewhat too. But heralding farmers and grain and stuff like that, and he had a grain stash too. So was he a Johnny Appleseed type character? And what's this got to do with heralding grain and civilization and so on? Well, I've got a new video coming out where they found grain that's well, the older one video I just did recently was 33,000-year-old bread that was being made and grains ground up. And then now this other one is one that's been recently found in the last couple of years in the Holy Land or Motherland. And it dates to around the same time too. And we'll look into that in a video coming up shortly. So remember this wheat and grain that's here. Like, share, and subscribe. Peace.